I never thought my engagement party would end with my mother's handprint burning across my cheek and 50 guests staring in stunned silence. But there I was, standing in the backyard where I'd blown out birthday candles as a child, tears streaming down my face after Patricia just slapped me for refusing to hand over my carefully saved $50,000 wedding fund to my younger sister Jessica. The shocking moment came when I wouldn't budge on giving away money I'd sacrificed everything to save. As gasps echoed around the suddenly quiet crowd and my fiancé Marcus rushed toward me, I locked eyes with the woman who gave birth to me and delivered the words that would change everything forever. Now you've lost the money and me. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, I learned early that love in the Rodriguez household came with conditions, and I rarely met them. While Jessica twirled across dance floors in sequined costumes that cost more than my entire wardrobe, I sat at the kitchen table completing homework assignments that earned praise, lasting exactly as long as it took Patricia to notice another trophy Jessica had won. The golden child syndrome wasn't subtle in our family. It blazed like the Arizona sun, impossible to ignore and equally impossible to escape. From the time Jessica could walk, she commanded attention with her natural grace and striking features that mirrored our mother's own beauty. Patricia would spend hours styling Jessica's long auburn hair, while I brushed my own plain brown locks in the bathroom mirror, listening to their laughter drift down the hallway. Dance lessons began when Jessica turned 4, followed by private coaching sessions, expensive costumes, and weekend competitions that required the entire family's schedule to revolve around her performances. Meanwhile, I discovered my talents lay in academics and organization skills that earned polite acknowledgement rather than celebration. When I brought home perfect report cards, Patricia would glance at them briefly before asking if I'd seen Jessica's latest routine. When I won the 8th grade science fair, the trophy sat on a kitchen shelf, while Jessica's dance awards filled an entire display case in the living room. The financial disparity became impossible to ignore as we grew older. Jessica's dance career demanded increasingly expensive investments, while my needs were considered basic necessities that should cost as little as possible. When I needed school supplies, Patricia hunted for clearance sales and generic brands. When Jessica needed new dance shoes, price became irrelevant because her talent deserved the best equipment available. At 16, I got my first job at Morrison's Books and a cozy independent bookstore downtown, where I could earn money while surrounded by stories that offered escape from my reality. Mrs. Chen, the elderly owner, appreciated my dedication and reliability, gradually giving me more responsibility and slightly raising my hourly wage. I felt proud earning my own money and contributing to household expenses, especially when Patricia explained how much Jessica's dance career was costing the family. What I didn't know was that my contributions weren't going toward household expenses at all. Every dollar I carefully handed over was being funneled directly into Jessica's dance fund, paying for private lessons with renowned instructors and entry fees for prestigious competitions. When Patricia convinced me that helping with family finances was what responsible daughters did, I believed her completely. I worked extra shifts, skipped social activities, and saved every possible penny because I thought I was helping keep our family afloat. The truth emerged in the cruelest possible way during my senior year of high school. College applications required financial aid forms, which meant accessing my college savings account for the first time since I'd started contributing to it at age 12. I expected to find around $15,000 accumulated from birthday gifts, Christmas money, and my own contributions over 6 years. Instead, the bank teller handed me a statement showing a balance of $307. Sitting in that sterile bank lobby, staring at numbers that made no sense, I felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. The college fund my grandmother had established and that I'd been faithfully contributing to had been systematically drained. When I confronted Patricia that evening, she didn't deny taking the money. Instead, she explained that Jessica's talent was a family investment that would benefit everyone eventually. She'd needed funds for a special summer intensive program that could launch Jessica's professional career. My college money was just sitting there earning minimal interest while Jessica's future was at stake. "You're smart enough to earn scholarships," Patricia said, not meeting my eyes as she folded laundry in the living room. "Jessica needs help that only family can provide. You understand, don't you, sweetheart?" I understood perfectly. I understood that my future had been sacrificed for my sister's dreams without my knowledge or consent. I understood that my mother viewed me as a resource to be exploited rather than a daughter to be protected. Most importantly, I understood that I could only rely on myself moving forward. That night, I researched every scholarship opportunity available and began preparing applications with fierce determination. I worked double shifts at the bookstore, saving money in a new account at a different bank that only I could access. When guidance counselors asked about my college preferences, I focused exclusively on schools offering full academic scholarships. I wouldn't let my mother's betrayal derail my education or my future. The revelation about my college fund marked the end of my childhood innocence regarding family loyalty. While Jessica continued dancing her way through high school with increasing success and parental support, I built my independence through pure determination and careful planning. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University, and moved out of my childhood home at 18 with savings account that Patricia couldn't touch and dreams that nobody could steal from me. College life at Arizona State offered me freedom I'd never experienced, though I worked harder than most students to maintain it. Between classes, I held 2 part-time jobs and picked up freelance tutoring sessions to cover living expenses and start building my future fund. Other students complained about cramped dorm rooms and dining hall food, but I felt grateful for every small luxury my independence provided. Most importantly, I was finally saving money that belonged entirely to me. During my junior year, I met Marcus Campbell at a campus coffee shop where I was studying between shifts at the campus bookstore. He was completing his master's degree in civil engineering, and our conversation started when he noticed the advanced statistics textbook I was highlighting while sipping my 3rd cup of cheap caffeine. His genuine interest in my studies, rather than just my appearance, caught my attention immediately. Marcus possessed a quiet confidence that came from knowing his own worth without needing to prove it to others. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on shared values rather than dramatic passion. Marcus appreciated my ambition and work ethic, while I admired his integrity and kindness toward everyone he encountered. When he told me about his close-knit family who supported each other without keeping score, I felt both envious and hopeful that such relationships actually existed. His parents, Helen and Robert Campbell, welcomed me warmly from our first meeting, treating me like the daughter they'd always hoped Marcus would bring home. After graduating with my marketing degree, I landed a coordinator position at Desert Bloom Marketing, a mid-sized firm specializing in southwestern tourism campaigns. The salary wasn't enormous, but it allowed me to move into my own apartment and begin seriously saving for my future. Marcus had accepted a position with a respected engineering firm, and we both felt ready to build our adult lives together in Phoenix. That's when I started my secret wedding fund mission with the intensity of a military operation. I'd learned from my mother's betrayal that financial security required absolute privacy and careful planning. I opened savings accounts at 3 different banks, none of which had any connection to the credit union where Patricia had worked during my teenage years. Every account was in my name alone, with statements sent to a post office box that only I could access. My saving strategy required extreme discipline that would have impressed financial advisors. I lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment in an older complex that offered reasonable rent and utilities. My furniture came from thrift stores and garage sales carefully selected for durability rather than style. I cooked every meal at home, packing lunches for work and avoiding restaurants except for special occasions with Marcus. Designer clothes were completely off limits, replaced by classic pieces from discount retailers that could be mixed and matched for professional appearances. Entertainment expenses were minimal since I preferred reading library books to expensive movies and hiking Arizona's beautiful trails rather than costly weekend trips. When friends invited me to expensive activities, I politely declined and suggested alternatives that fit my budget. Some people thought I was cheap or antisocial, but Marcus understood my goals and often joined me for budget-friendly adventures that strengthened our relationship. The freelance work provided crucial additional income that went directly into savings. I edited college application essays for high school students, managed social media accounts for small businesses, and tutored struggling college students in statistics and marketing principles. Every extra dollar earned represented progress toward the financial independence that would protect me from ever being vulnerable to family manipulation again. By my 26th birthday, the wedding fund had grown to $30,000, and I felt confident about my progress. Marcus and I had been discussing marriage more seriously, and I wanted to contribute equally to our wedding costs rather than depending on his family's generosity. The fund represented more than money. It symbolized my ability to create the life I wanted through my own efforts. However, I gradually noticed signs that my financial privacy might not be as secure as I'd believed. Patricia's phone calls became increasingly frequent, and her questions about my job and living situation grew more specific. She'd ask about my apartment's rent, cost my car payment amount, and whether I was saving money for the future. I answered vaguely, but something about her persistent curiosity made me uncomfortable. The truth revealed itself during a routine visit to my primary bank for account maintenance. The teller mentioned that someone had called asking about my account balance, claiming to be updating family financial records for insurance purposes. The bank hadn't provided any information, but they wanted to verify that I'd authorized the inquiry. My blood ran cold as I realized Patricia was still trying to monitor my finances, even though I was a completely independent adult. Further investigation revealed that Patricia had maintained connections with several banking institutions through her previous credit union employment. While she couldn't access my accounts directly, she'd been using professional relationships to gather information about my financial status. The realization that my mother was essentially stalking my money made me feel violated and paranoid about every financial decision. I immediately changed banks again, choosing institutions with stricter privacy policies and no local connections to Patricia's former workplace. I also opened additional accounts under variations of my name and used my work address for all financial correspondence. The extra precautions felt excessive, but I'd learned that protecting myself from family interference required constant vigilance. As my savings approached $50,000, I noticed Patricia's phone calls becoming even more frequent and urgent. She began mentioning Jessica's relationship with Trevor, a struggling musician who played guitar at local coffee shops and open mic nights. Patricia described Trevor as talented and artistic qualities that clearly reminded her of her own abandoned dreams of becoming a professional dancer before family responsibilities intervened. Jessica's engagement to Trevor was announced through a series of social media posts featuring elaborate photos and detailed descriptions of their romantic proposal story. Patricia called me immediately after the announcement, gushing about their young love and casually mentioning how expensive weddings had become. She wondered aloud how Jessica would afford the celebration she deserved while Trevor was still building his music career. The subtle pressure began immediately. Patricia would call to chat about family news and somehow steer every conversation toward Jessica's wedding planning challenges. She'd mentioned specific vendors Jessica had contacted, sharing their astronomical price quotes with theatrical sighs about young love being so expensive. She described Jessica's Pinterest boards filled with dream wedding inspiration that seemed financially impossible given Trevor's income from weekend gigs and Jessica's part-time work at a fitness studio. "I just want both my daughters to have beautiful weddings," Patricia would say with perfectly calculated wistfulness. "It's not fair that financial circumstances should limit such important celebrations." I remained polite but non-committal during these conversations, refusing to take the bait despite Patricia's increasingly obvious hints. My wedding fund had a specific purpose, and I wouldn't let family guilt derail my careful financial planning. However, I sensed that Patricia's campaign was just beginning, and her determination to access my savings would only intensify as time passed. Marcus proposed during a weekend trip to Sedona that February, choosing a hiking trail overlooking the red rock formations that had become special to us during our 2-year relationship. He'd hidden my grandmother's antique engagement ring in his backpack, having obtained it through a series of conversations with my father, William, that I only learned about later. The ring had belonged to my paternal grandmother, Maria Rodriguez, who had specifically requested that it go to me when I got married. William had kept it safe despite Patricia's suggestions over the years that Jessica might prefer it for her own future engagement. The proposal itself was perfectly Marcus thoughtful and intimate, without unnecessary drama or public spectacle. We'd stopped for water and granola bars at a scenic overlook when he suddenly became nervous, stumbling over words that usually came easily to him. When he dropped to one knee and presented the delicate gold ring with its modest but beautiful diamond, I started crying before he finished his carefully rehearsed speech about wanting to spend his life making me happy. "Yes," I whispered through tears, watching him slide my grandmother's ring onto my finger with shaking hands. "Yes, of course, yes." We spent the rest of the weekend planning our future together, discussing timeline preferences and guest list considerations, while celebrating our engagement with quiet dinners and long conversations about our shared goals. Marcus wanted a summer wedding, so his extended family from Colorado could attend easily. I preferred fall celebrations, but was flexible about dates since we both prioritized family participation over specific seasonal preferences. The drive back to Phoenix filled me with excitement about sharing our news with the people we loved. Marcus called his parents from the car, putting the phone on speaker so I could participate in their enthusiastic congratulations and immediate offers to help with wedding planning. Helen Campbell's joy was infectious as she welcomed me officially into their family, and Robert promised to start researching venues that would accommodate both families comfortably. My own family's reaction proved less straightforward. When I called William first, his genuine happiness and pride warmed my heart completely. He congratulated Marcus, personally sharing stories about my grandmother's ring and expressing gratitude that it would finally serve its intended purpose. His emotional response reminded me that despite his passive role in family dynamics, my father truly loved me and wanted my happiness. Patricia's reaction was politely positive, initially offering appropriate congratulations and asking standard questions about wedding timeline and venue preferences. However, her tone shifted noticeably when the conversation moved toward practical considerations, like budget planning and vendor selection. Instead of asking about my preferences or offering traditional maternal support, she immediately began discussing Jessica's recent engagement and the financial challenges facing young couples in today's economy. "It's wonderful that you both have stable careers," Patricia said with subtle emphasis that made my stomach tighten. "Jessica and Trevor are so young and just starting out. Wedding planning must be so much easier when money isn't a constant worry." The comparison stung because of its obvious intent, but I kept my response neutral and polite. "Marcus and I feel fortunate to have good jobs. We're planning something modest that reflects our values." "Modest is wise," Patricia agreed, though her tone suggested disappointment rather than approval. "Of course, some dreams are worth investing in, even if it means making sacrifices. Family celebrations only happen once after all." That conversation set the pattern for every interaction with my mother over the following weeks. She would begin with appropriate engagement-related topics before steering toward Jessica's financial struggles and the unfairness of one sister having advantages that the other lacked. The guilt campaign was subtle but relentless, delivered through carefully chosen words that were impossible to directly challenge without seeming paranoid or oversensitive. Patricia began sharing specific details about Jessica's wedding planning process, complete with vendor quotes and venue pricing that seemed calculated to emphasize the financial impossibility of her dreams. She'd mentioned that Jessica had found the perfect dress but couldn't afford its $1,500 price tag. She'd describe a beautiful venue that Jessica loved but couldn't book because their package prices started at $20,000 for basic ceremonies. Jessica spent hours looking at wedding magazines. Patricia would sigh during our weekly phone calls. She's saved pictures of everything she wants, but reality is so different from dreams, isn't it? The manipulation became more direct as weeks passed, and I remained unmoved by subtle pressure. Patricia began making statements about family loyalty and the obligations that successful siblings had toward those who were struggling. She'd reference my college scholarship and stable career as evidence that I'd been blessed with advantages that came with responsibilities toward less fortunate family members. Success isn't just about personal achievement, she lectured during one particularly frustrating conversation. It's about lifting up the people you love when you have the ability to help them reach their potential. When indirect pressure failed to produce results, Patricia escalated to emotional blackmail that was much harder to deflect politely. She began crying during phone calls, describing her heartbreak over watching Jessica sacrifice her dreams because of financial limitations. She painted elaborate pictures of Jessica's disappointment and Trevor's growing frustration with their inability to afford a proper wedding celebration. "I just want both my daughters to be happy." Patricia would weep into the phone. "It breaks my heart that money has to come between family members who should be supporting each other." The guilt was overwhelming, even though I recognized the manipulation tactics clearly. Patricia was exploiting my love for Jessica and my desire to be a good person, using emotional weapons that she'd perfected over decades of controlling family dynamics. She knew exactly which buttons to push to make me feel selfish and ungrateful, despite the logic that told me my savings were legitimately mine to control. Marcus noticed my increasing stress and gently encouraged me to establish boundaries with my mother's pressure campaign. His family's healthy communication patterns provided a stark contrast to the dysfunction I'd grown up accepting as normal. Helen Campbell offered perspective from her own experience dealing with manipulative relatives, suggesting specific phrases I could use to redirect conversations without being confrontational. "You don't owe anyone explanations about your personal financial decisions," Helen reminded me during Sunday dinner at their house. "Family support goes both ways, and love shouldn't come with price tags attached to it." However, setting boundaries with Patricia proved more difficult than I'd anticipated. When I tried redirecting conversations away from Jessica's wedding expenses, my mother became hurt and accusatory, claiming that I was being secretive and distant from family concerns. When I explained that my wedding fund was specifically designated and couldn't be redistributed, she questioned why I needed so much money for a modest celebration. The pressure intensified when Patricia began recruiting other family members to support her campaign. During a cousin's birthday party, several relatives made comments about how wonderful it would be for the sisters to help each other with wedding planning. Aunt Sarah mentioned how lucky Jessica was to have such a successful older sister who could share resources and experience. Uncle David suggested that joint wedding planning might be more economical and bring the family closer together. Each comment felt like a coordinated attack designed to make me appear selfish for maintaining control over my own savings. The family members making these statements genuinely believed they were encouraging sisterly love and mutual support, not realizing they were participating in Patricia's manipulation campaign. I smiled politely and changed subjects, but the message was clear. The entire family expected me to finance Jessica's wedding dreams. The situation reached a breaking point when Patricia threatened to boycott our engagement party unless I promised to share my wedding fund with Jessica. She claimed that attending the celebration while knowing one daughter could afford her dreams while the other couldn't would be too emotionally painful to bear. She suggested that the engagement party should celebrate both couples equally with announcements about shared wedding planning and mutual financial support. "How can I smile and congratulate you when Jessica is crying herself to sleep every night?" Patricia demanded during our final pre-party phone call. "What kind of mother would I be if I celebrated one daughter's happiness while ignoring the other's heartbreak?" The ultimatum was delivered with theatrical emotion designed to make me cave under pressure, but instead it clarified my resolve completely. I realized that no amount of money would satisfy Patricia's demands because the issue wasn't really about wedding expenses. It was about control manipulation and her inability to accept that I'd become financially independent despite her attempts to exploit my resources throughout my life. "Mom," I said quietly, feeling calmer than I'd felt in weeks, "this is my engagement party with Marcus. If you choose not to attend, I'll be disappointed, but I'll understand. However, I won't compromise my financial security or change my wedding plans to accommodate demands that aren't reasonable or fair." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that I thought the call had dropped. When Patricia finally responded, her voice carried a cold edge that I'd never heard directed toward me before. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences of putting money ahead of family," she said before hanging up without saying goodbye. 2 days after Patricia's ultimatum, Jessica called me unexpectedly during my lunch break at work, her voice shaky with tears that sounded genuine until I considered the timing. She asked to meet for coffee that afternoon, claiming she needed sisterly advice about wedding planning stress that was overwhelming her completely. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet at our usual spot, a quiet cafe near her fitness studio, where we'd shared conversations throughout our adult relationship. Jessica arrived looking deliberately fragile, wearing minimal makeup that emphasized the dark circles under her eyes, and choosing clothes that made her appear smaller and more vulnerable than usual. She ordered only herbal tea while I purchased my usual coffee and pastry, immediately launching into a heartbreaking description of her wedding planning struggles that was clearly rehearsed, but delivered with convincing emotion. I never realized how expensive everything would be. She began dabbing at her eyes with tissue she'd brought specifically for this conversation. "Trevor and I are trying to be practical, but even the simplest options cost more than we make in months." She described visiting venue after venue only to discover that basic rental fees exceeded their entire budget before adding necessary expenses like catering, flowers, and photography. She painted pictures of Trevor's disappointment when they had to cross beautiful locations off their list, emphasizing his growing frustration with their financial limitations and her fear that he might begin questioning their engagement. "He's starting to talk about just going to the courthouse," Jessica whispered, making it sound like the worst possible outcome rather than a perfectly valid choice. "But this is supposed to be the most important day of our lives. I've dreamed about my wedding since I was little, and now it feels like I'll have to settle for something that doesn't reflect how much we love each other." The manipulation was sophisticated because it mixed legitimate wedding planning stress with calculated emotional pressure designed to make me feel guilty about my financial advantages. Jessica was genuinely overwhelmed by wedding costs, but she was also deliberately exaggerating their situation to create sympathy that would translate into financial support from her more successful older sister. She shared specific examples of compromises they were making, each story crafted to maximize my emotional response while minimizing focus on whether those compromises were actually problematic. She described looking at secondhand wedding dresses because new ones were too expensive, choosing artificial flowers because real ones cost too much, and considering potluck receptions because professional catering was beyond their reach. "I know you think I'm being dramatic," Jessica continued, reading my skeptical expression accurately, "but you have to understand what it's like to love someone and not be able to give them the celebration you both deserve. Every decision feels like we're admitting that our love isn't worth investing in properly." The emotional manipulation escalated when Jessica began describing specific wedding vendors she'd contacted, sharing their enthusiastic responses to her initial inquiries, followed by awkward conversations when pricing information was revealed. She painted elaborate pictures of helpful professionals who clearly wanted to work with her, but couldn't justify reducing their rates below sustainable levels for their businesses. "There's this amazing photographer whose work is absolutely perfect for what we want," Jessica explained, scrolling through portfolio images on her phone to show me examples. "She's booked solid for the next year, but she said she might have a cancellation for our date. The problem is her package starts at $3,000, which is literally more than Trevor makes in 2 months. Each story was designed to emphasize that Jessica had excellent taste and realistic expectations, but simply lacked the financial resources to execute her vision. The subtext was clear: with modest financial assistance from her successful sister, she could have the wedding of her dreams, while I would barely notice the reduction in my own wedding budget. Jessica was careful to avoid making direct requests for money during the first part of our conversation, instead focusing on building empathy and establishing the legitimacy of her financial struggles. She wanted me to reach the conclusion independently that helping her was the logical and sisterly thing to do, rather than feeling pressured by explicit demands that might trigger my defensive instincts. However, when I remained sympathetic but non-committal about her wedding challenges, Jessica's approach became more direct and emotionally intense. She began describing the impact their financial limitations were having on her relationship with Trevor, painting alarming pictures of growing tension that threatened their entire engagement. Trevor comes from a family where money isn't constantly an issue, Jessica explained with carefully chosen words. His parents are divorced, but they both have stable careers, and they're planning to contribute significantly to his wedding expenses. I think he's starting to realize how different our family situations are. The implication was that Trevor might reconsider his engagement if Jessica couldn't provide a wedding that matched his family's financial contributions, a devastating possibility that would destroy her happiness while proving her unworthiness of lasting love. Jessica was essentially arguing that her relationship's survival depended on external financial support that only I could provide. I'm scared that he's going to start seeing our financial stress as a preview of our entire married life. Jessica continued, tears flowing more freely as she built toward her emotional crescendo. What if he decides that love isn't enough to overcome constant worry about money? What if he realizes he could find someone whose family can actually contribute to building their future together? The manipulation reached its peak when Jessica shifted from describing her own fears to questioning my priorities as her sister and best friend. She suggested that my resistance to helping financially indicated a fundamental lack of care for her happiness and well-being, transforming the conversation from a request for support into a test of familial loyalty. "I know you've worked hard for your money," Jessica said, her tone becoming slightly accusatory despite her continued tears. "But I also know that you love me and want me to be happy. I keep wondering whether you're holding back because you don't think I deserve help or because you don't really understand how desperate our situation has become." When I tried to explain that my wedding fund served a specific purpose and couldn't be redistributed without compromising my own financial security, Jessica's demeanor shifted dramatically. The vulnerable, tearful persona disappeared, completely replaced by cold calculation that revealed the true nature of our conversation. "Actually, I've been recording our conversations for the past few weeks," Jessica announced, casually producing her smartphone and showing me several audio files labeled with dates and times. "I have enough material to create a pretty compelling social media campaign about sisterly love and family support." The threat was delivered with chilling matter-of-factness, as if betraying my privacy and planning to humiliate me publicly were reasonable responses to my refusal to finance her wedding dreams. Jessica scrolled through the recordings, playing brief clips that captured my voice, discussing wedding budgets and family financial dynamics without the full context that would explain my position. "Listen to how you sound when you talk about money," Jessica instructed, playing an edited segment where my voice discussed wedding expenses in ways that could be interpreted as callous or selfish without understanding the manipulation I was responding to. Now imagine how this would sound to people who don't know the whole story. She showed me draft social media posts that painted me as a wealthy, selfish sister who refused to help her struggling younger sibling achieve basic wedding happiness. The posts included carefully selected audio clips, manipulated to remove context and make me appear heartless toward Jessica's legitimate financial struggles. She'd even created fake screenshots of text message conversations that never happened, showing me making cruel comments about her relationship with Trevor. "I really don't want to post any of this," Jessica said with false sweetness that made my skin crawl. But I also don't want to watch my relationship fall apart because my own sister thinks money is more important than family love. So you get to choose what happens next." The revelation that Jessica had been systematically recording our private conversations and planning to weaponize them against me felt like a complete betrayal of everything I'd believed about our relationship. The sister I thought I knew and loved had been manipulating me with the same calculating ruthlessness that our mother had perfected over decades. "You have until the engagement party to decide," Jessica concluded, gathering her things with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the power in our relationship. "Either announce that you're sharing your wedding fund with me, or watch your reputation get destroyed by someone who knows exactly which buttons to push." As she walked away from the cafe, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that my own sister was prepared to blackmail me for money, I finally understood that the dysfunction in our family ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. The golden child hadn't been protected from Patricia's manipulation. She'd been trained to perpetuate it against anyone who threatened the family's established power dynamics. That evening, I sat in Marcus's apartment staring at my engagement ring while struggling to process Jessica's transformation from loving sister to calculating blackmailer. The weight of her threats pressed down on me like Arizona summer heat, making it difficult to breathe normally or think clearly about my options. When Marcus arrived home from work and found me curled on his couch, looking devastated, his immediate concern broke through the emotional numbness that had protected me during the drive from the cafe. "What happened?" he asked, settling beside me with the gentle patience that had drawn me to him initially. "You look like someone died." I told him everything, starting with Patricia's escalating pressure campaign and ending with Jessica's recorded conversations and social media threats. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the full scope of my family's manipulation became clear. When I finished explaining the situation, he was quiet for several minutes, processing the information with the analytical approach he brought to complex engineering problems. "They're financially abusing you," he said finally, his voice carrying controlled anger that I'd never heard before. "This isn't about wedding expenses or family support. This is about control and exploitation that's been going on for years." His perspective helped me recognize patterns I'd been too close to see clearly. Marcus pointed out that healthy families don't systematically drain one member's resources to fund another's dreams. They don't record private conversations for blackmail purposes or threaten public humiliation to enforce compliance with unreasonable demands. What I'd been trained to accept as normal family dynamics were actually sophisticated abuse tactics that had shaped my entire relationship with money and self-worth. "We need to tell my parents," Marcus said firmly. "They've dealt with family financial manipulation before, and they'll know how to help you protect yourself legally and emotionally." Sunday dinner at the Campbell house had become a weekly tradition that I treasured for its peaceful predictability and genuine affection. Helen always prepared elaborate meals that brought the family together around their dining room table for hours of conversation about work projects, community events, and shared memories that strengthened their bonds rather than creating competition or resentment. That particular Sunday, however, Marcus called ahead to request a private family meeting about a serious situation that needed their guidance and support. Helen and Robert listened with growing horror as I described the lifetime of financial abuse that had culminated in Jessica's blackmail campaign. Helen's eyes filled with tears when I explained how my college fund had been stolen to pay for Jessica's dance career, while Robert's engineering mind immediately began analyzing the legal implications of recorded conversations and threatened social media attacks. "This is exactly what happened with my sister Carol," Helen said quietly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand with maternal warmth I'd never experienced from my own mother. The same patterns, the same justifications, the same threats, when the victim finally tries to establish boundaries. Helen shared her own story of growing up with a manipulative sister who convinced their parents that her needs were more important than Helen's practical goals. Carol had been the artistic dreamer who required expensive art supplies, private lessons, and financial support for various creative ventures that never generated income. Meanwhile, Helen worked through nursing school, paid her own expenses, and was expected to contribute to household costs, while Carol's contributions were considered optional because of her artistic temperament. The manipulation escalated when I refused to co-sign a loan for Carol's art studio. Helen continued, her voice trembling with remembered pain. She threatened to tell our entire extended family that I was jealous of her talent and trying to sabotage her success. She had recordings of private conversations where I expressed frustration about always being expected to sacrifice for her dreams. Robert nodded grimly, adding details about the legal nightmare that followed when Carol actually went through with her threats. She'd posted edited audio clips on social media, created fake documentation of loans. She claimed Helen had refused to repay, and convinced several family members that Helen was a selfish sister who had abandoned her obligations to family solidarity. The worst part was watching our parents choose sides. Helen said, tears flowing freely now. They were so invested in Carol's success that they couldn't see how their favoritism was destroying both daughters. They actually asked me to apologize to Carol and agree to co-sign the loan to restore family peace. The parallels between Helen's experience and my current situation were too obvious to ignore. Both stories featured golden children whose dreams were prioritized over practical daughters' security. Both involved systematic financial abuse disguised as family loyalty. Both escalated to threats and blackmail when the victims finally tried to establish appropriate boundaries. "What did you do?" I asked, though I suspected the answer wouldn't be simple or easy to implement. "I went no contact with Carol and limited contact with our parents until they could treat both daughters equally," Helen replied firmly. "It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but it was also the only way to protect my marriage and my sanity from ongoing manipulation." Robert provided the practical perspective that my situation needed, explaining legal options for protecting myself from Jessica's threats, while maintaining documentation of the abuse for potential future proceedings. He recommended specific attorneys who specialized in family financial disputes and suggested strategies for securing my assets against further manipulation attempts. However, the most surprising support came when Helen made an offer that took my breath away completely. She suggested that Robert and Marcus petition the court to legally adopt me as their daughter, providing both symbolic and practical protection against my biological family's ongoing manipulation. Adult adoption creates legal family relationships that can protect you from harassment, while demonstrating that chosen family matters more than blood relations. She explained, her voice filled with maternal love that made me cry harder than I'd cried since childhood. "We've already considered you our daughter for the past 2 years. Making it official would just formalize what we all feel in our hearts." The offer represented everything I'd longed for throughout my childhood parents, who prioritized my well-being over their own convenience protection from manipulation instead of participation in it, and unconditional love that didn't come with financial price tags attached. Helen and Robert were essentially offering to become the parents I'd always needed, complete with legal protections that would shield me from Patricia's future interference. Marcus supported his parents' proposal, enthusiastically pointing out that adoption would also simplify our wedding planning by eliminating the complex family dynamics that threatened to overshadow our celebration. We could focus on creating a joyful ceremony surrounded by people who genuinely supported our happiness, rather than navigating manipulation campaigns designed to exploit our special day for financial gain. "You don't have to decide immediately," Robert assured me as the emotional weight of their offer settled over the room. "But you should know that we're completely serious about this, and we've already researched the legal requirements to make sure it's feasible. That evening, lying in Marcus's arms while processing the day's revelations, I felt simultaneously heartbroken about my biological family's betrayal and overwhelmed by the Campbells' generous love. The contrast between the two family systems couldn't have been starker, one based on manipulation, exploitation, and conditional support, the other grounded in mutual respect, genuine care, and protective commitment. The legal adoption option provided a practical solution to my immediate problems, while offering emotional healing that I hadn't known was possible. Helen and Robert weren't trying to replace my childhood experiences or erase my biological connections completely. They were offering me a future where family relationships were based on love rather than leverage support, rather than exploitation, and celebration rather than competition. For the first time since Jessica's threats had devastated me, I felt hope that my engagement party could still become the joyful celebration Marcus and I deserved. With the Campbell family's protection and support, I could face whatever manipulation Patricia and Jessica attempted, while maintaining my financial independence and emotional boundaries. The following week, emboldened by the Campbell family's support and legal guidance, I decided to investigate the full extent of my family's financial dysfunction before the engagement party. Robert had recommended a forensic accountant who specialized in family financial abuse cases, and her initial consultation revealed investigative techniques I could implement independently to understand how deeply the manipulation had penetrated our family's financial structure. My research began with public record searches that revealed shocking information about my childhood home's mortgage history. The house that William and Patricia had purchased shortly after their marriage should have been completely paid off by the time I graduated high school, given their combined incomes and the relatively modest home prices when they'd bought it in the early 1990s. Instead, county records showed a series of refinancing transactions that had steadily increased the mortgage balance over the past 10 years. Each refinancing had extracted equity from the home, converting Patricia and William's primary asset into a source of cash that had funded an increasingly expensive lifestyle centered around Jessica's various pursuits. The pattern was clear once I understood what to look for. Every time Jessica's activities required significant financial investment, another refinancing transaction appeared in the public records. Dance competition seasons coincided with cash-out refinancing that provided funds for travel costumes and entry fees. Jessica's brief modeling career attempt had been funded through a home equity line of credit that remained largely unpaid. Most recently, a substantial refinancing had occurred just 3 months ago, right around the time Jessica's engagement had been announced. Armed with this information, I confronted William during an unexpected visit to his office at the insurance agency, where he'd worked for over 20 years. I found him during his lunch break looking older and more stressed than I'd noticed during recent family gatherings. When I presented the refinancing documentation, I discovered his face crumpled with shame and exhaustion that spoke to years of financial pressure he'd been hiding from everyone. "How much do you owe now, Dad?" I asked gently, though. I braced myself for an answer that would be worse than I'd imagined. $230,000, he whispered, staring at his desk rather than meeting my eyes. The house was worth maybe $180 before the market started dropping last year. The numbers represented a financial catastrophe that went far beyond wedding planning difficulties. William and Patricia, both in their mid-50s, owed significantly more on their home than it was currently worthwhile approaching retirement age, with minimal savings and mounting debt obligations. The refinancing strategy that had funded Jessica's lifestyle had essentially stolen their financial security and left them vulnerable to foreclosure if either lost their job or faced unexpected medical expenses. "Dad, this is financial suicide," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm while processing the magnitude of their situation. "How did you let it get this bad?" William's explanation revealed years of gradual manipulation that had escalated so slowly he'd never recognized the pattern until it was too late to reverse course. Patricia's requests had begun reasonably with modest expenses for Jessica's early dance lessons justified as investments in their daughter's talent and happiness. When those lessons required additional equipment or competition fees, refinancing seemed like a logical solution that would spread costs over manageable monthly payments. Each subsequent request had been slightly larger, but still individually reasonable when considered against their home's increasing equity during the real estate boom. Jessica's dance career required higher-level instruction that cost more, but offered greater opportunities for potential professional success. Her modeling portfolio represented a chance to diversify her artistic pursuits while building name recognition that could benefit her dance career simultaneously. Your mother was so convinced that Jessica would become successful enough to pay everything back. William explained, his voice filled with regret and exhaustion. Every investment was supposed to be temporary until Jessica's career took off and she could support herself independently. The rationalization process had been so gradual that William never questioned whether Jessica's pursuits were actually generating income or building toward financial independence. Instead, he'd been trained to measure success through Patricia's emotional satisfaction with Jessica's achievements and her continued optimism about future opportunities that always seemed just within reach. However, the most devastating revelation came when William admitted that foreclosure proceedings had already begun, though they'd been keeping this information secret from both daughters while desperately searching for solutions. The mounting debt payments had become unsustainable on their combined salaries, especially as Patricia had reduced her work hours to support Jessica's various activities more actively. "We're 3 months behind on payments," William confessed, pulling out official-looking documents that he'd been hiding in his office desk. "The bank sent the final notice last week. We have 60 days to bring everything current, or they'll schedule the foreclosure sale." The foreclosure timeline explained Patricia's increasingly desperate pressure campaign regarding my wedding fund. She wasn't simply trying to help Jessica achieve her dream wedding. She was trying to access emergency funds that could save their home while maintaining the fiction that their financial crisis was temporary and manageable. "How much would you need to stop the foreclosure?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer would exceed any reasonable assistance I could provide. $47,000 to bring everything current, plus monthly payments that are $1,800 more than what we can afford long-term. William replied, confirming that their financial crisis required solutions far beyond my wedding fund's capacity. The conversation revealed that Patricia had been planning to approach me for help with their mortgage crisis, using Jessica's wedding as emotional leverage to make the request seem reasonable and temporary. She'd calculated that my wedding fund could solve their immediate foreclosure problem, while my stable income could help them manage ongoing payments through some arrangement that she hadn't fully developed yet. "She wanted to wait until after your engagement party to explain everything." William continued, his shame deepening as he revealed the full scope of Patricia's manipulation strategy. "She thought that once you were celebrating your happiness with Marcus, you'd be more willing to help family members who were struggling with circumstances beyond their control." The calculated timing of Patricia's planned revelation demonstrated sophisticated manipulation that went far beyond desperate parental love. She'd been orchestrating a complex emotional campaign designed to maximize my guilt while minimizing my ability to establish boundaries or seek outside perspective before making financial decisions that would impact my entire future. "Dad, even if I gave you every penny I've saved, it would only delay the inevitable," I explained, feeling heartbroken about their situation, while recognizing that throwing my money into their financial crisis wouldn't actually solve their underlying problems. "You need professional debt counseling and probably bankruptcy consultation, not short-term cash from family members." William nodded slowly, acknowledging what he'd probably known for months, but hadn't been willing to face directly. Their financial crisis required systematic solutions that addressed spending patterns, income limitations, and debt management strategies that went far beyond emergency family assistance. However, the most disturbing aspect of our conversation was William's revelation that Patricia had already approached other family members for financial assistance, using different stories and justifications with each person to avoid revealing the full scope of their crisis. She'd borrowed several $1,000s from her sister Sarah for supposed home repairs that had actually gone toward mortgage payments. She'd convinced her elderly mother to help with Jessica's wedding expenses by taking out a cash advance on her fixed-income credit card. "How many people has Mom borrowed money from?" I asked, dreading an answer that would reveal a web of financial deception spanning their entire social network. "I don't know exactly," William admitted. "She handles most of our financial communications, and she says she's managing everything, but I suspect she's been asking for help from everyone she can think of without telling them about the foreclosure." The pattern of financial abuse extended far beyond our immediate family, encompassing elderly relatives, family friends, and possibly even Jessica herself, who might not understand that her lifestyle was being funded through debt that threatened everyone's financial security. Patricia had become a sophisticated financial predator who exploited emotional relationships to fund an unsustainable lifestyle that benefited primarily Jessica, while devastating everyone else's long-term security. As I left William's office that afternoon carrying documentation of their financial crisis that he'd finally shared with someone, I realized that my wedding fund represented far more than money for my celebration. It symbolized my escape from a family system that consumed resources without generating sustainable value, leaving destruction in its wake while maintaining the illusion of success and happiness. Armed with knowledge about my family's true financial crisis, I spent the week before our engagement party trying to decide whether to confront Patricia directly about her manipulation campaign or simply implement protective strategies while allowing events to unfold naturally. The Campbell family's legal advisor recommended documenting everything while avoiding confrontational conversations that might escalate Jessica's blackmail threats or trigger additional desperate behavior from Patricia. However, I underestimated the extent to which Patricia was willing to manipulate our celebration for her own purposes. While I focused on final party preparations with Marcus and his family, Patricia was orchestrating a sophisticated intervention campaign that would transform our engagement announcement into a public pressure session designed to force my compliance with her financial demands. The first sign of trouble came when Helen Campbell called me Thursday evening with concerns about unusual activity related to our guest list. Several people had contacted her, asking for details about gift expectations and whether there would be opportunities to offer advice to the happy couple during the celebration. The questions seemed oddly focused on family financial planning and sisterly support, rather than typical engagement party curiosity. "Someone asked whether you and Jessica were planning to coordinate your weddings." Helen reported confusion evident in her voice. Another person wanted to know if there would be time for family members to share wisdom about marriage and family obligations during the toasts. I immediately called Marcus, who had noticed similar strange behavior from extended family members who rarely contacted him directly. His cousin David had asked whether our wedding budget was sufficient or if we might need family assistance with expenses. His Aunt Linda had mentioned hearing that engagement parties sometimes featured announcements about mutual family support between siblings getting married around the same time. The pattern suggested that Patricia had been systematically preparing our guests for some kind of public appeal during the party, priming them with talking points about family financial cooperation and sisterly loyalty that would support whatever announcement she planned to make during our celebration. Friday morning brought confirmation of my suspicions when I received a call from my cousin, Maria Patricia's sister's daughter, asking innocent-sounding questions about my relationship with Jessica and our mutual wedding planning progress. Maria mentioned how wonderful it was that sisters could support each other during such expensive life events, and how much our extended family admired siblings who shared resources to help each other achieve their dreams. "Your mom is so proud of how successful you've become," Maria said with enthusiasm that felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. She keeps talking about what a generous person you are and how much you love Jessica. She's convinced you'll find a way to help make both weddings special for the whole family. The conversation revealed that Patricia had been conducting a publicity campaign within our extended family, establishing expectations that I would announce some kind of financial sharing arrangement during the engagement party. She'd been painting me as a generous sister who was planning to surprise Jessica with wedding assistance, setting up a scenario where refusing would make me appear cruel and disappointing to relatives who'd been led to expect a heartwarming display of sisterly love. I think she's planning something big for tomorrow. Maria continued lowering her voice as if sharing confidential information. She keeps hinting about a special announcement that will show everyone how much your family supports each other. I can't wait to hear what you've planned. The realization that Patricia had manipulated our entire extended family into expecting some dramatic gesture of financial generosity made me feel sick with anxiety and anger. She'd essentially transformed our private family conflict into a public performance, where I would be forced to choose between my financial security and my reputation among relatives who'd been deliberately misinformed about the situation. I immediately called Marcus, who suggested we consider postponing the engagement party until we could address the manipulation campaign that Patricia had apparently been orchestrating for weeks. However, Helen Campbell offered a different perspective that proved more strategic and empowering than avoidance would be. Let her try her manipulation in public, Helen suggested during an emergency family meeting Friday evening. You'll have witnesses to document exactly what she's willing to do to pressure you, and you'll have our support to respond appropriately without being isolated or overwhelmed. Robert agreed, pointing out that public manipulation attempts often backfire when the victim is prepared and supported by people who understand the dynamics at play. If Patricia had coached extended family members to pressure me during the party, those same family members would witness firsthand the extent of her manipulation when I refused to comply with unreasonable demands. The truth has a way of becoming obvious when manipulators overreach, Robert said confidently. If she's planning to ambush you publicly, she's going to expose herself to people who thought they were supporting legitimate family cooperation. Marcus was less comfortable with the idea of allowing our engagement celebration to become a confrontation zone, but he understood that avoiding the situation would only postpone the inevitable while giving Patricia additional time to escalate her pressure campaign. We decided to proceed with the party while implementing protective strategies that would help us maintain control, regardless of what Patricia attempted. The protective strategies included having Helen and Robert attend as my adoptive parents, giving me parental advocates who could intervene if the situation became abusive. Marcus and I prepared specific responses to likely manipulation attempts, practicing calm language that would expose unreasonable behavior without becoming defensive or emotional. We also arranged for key guests to understand that some family dynamics might become uncomfortable, asking for their support in maintaining focus on our celebration rather than allowing manipulation to hijack the event. Saturday morning brought a call from Jessica that confirmed our suspicions about Patricia's planned intervention. Jessica's voice carried nervous excitement as she asked about specific timing for various party activities, particularly the toasts and any speeches that might be planned for the evening. "Mom has something really special planned for tonight," Jessica said, attempting to sound casual while obviously fishing for information about whether I'd prepared my own surprise announcements. She's been working on it for weeks, and she thinks it's going to make everyone really happy and bring our family even closer together. The conversation revealed that Jessica wasn't entirely comfortable with whatever Patricia had planned, despite her ongoing blackmail campaign. Her nervous energy suggested that she understood Patricia's plan might backfire or create family drama that would overshadow my celebration, potentially damaging Jessica's own reputation among relatives who expected to enjoy a peaceful family gathering. "What exactly is she planning?" I asked directly, hoping Jessica might reveal details that would help me prepare for the confrontation. "She wants it to be a surprise," Jessica replied evasively, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely supportive of maintaining secrecy. But I think you should be prepared for people to have strong feelings about family and sisterly love tonight. As evening approached, and I prepared for what would likely be the most challenging social event of my adult life, I felt a strange combination of anxiety and relief. The manipulation that had been poisoning my relationship with my mother for months was finally going to be exposed publicly, giving me the opportunity to respond clearly and definitively, while surrounded by witnesses who could understand the true dynamics at play. The elaborate preparations that Patricia had made for her intervention actually worked in my favor by demonstrating the calculated nature of her manipulation, rather than painting her as a desperate mother acting impulsively from love and concern. Her systematic campaign to coach extended family members revealed sophistication that would be difficult to excuse as emotional parental behavior once it became obvious to our guests. Saturday evening arrived with typical Arizona spring perfection, clear skies and comfortable temperatures that made our backyard celebration feel like something from a magazine spread. Marcus and I had chosen my childhood home for the engagement party specifically because it felt symbolically appropriate to celebrate our future in the place where I'd grown up, though I now realize that decision had provided Patricia with home field advantage for whatever manipulation she'd planned. The backyard had been transformed with string lights that Helen and Robert had helped hang between the mesquite trees, creating a magical atmosphere that should have filled me with pure joy as guests began arriving with congratulations and gifts. Tables covered in white linens displayed appetizers that Marcus's family had prepared, alongside desserts from my favorite local bakery. Everything looked perfect for the celebration we'd envisioned. Patricia greeted guests at the front door with warm hugs and enthusiastic explanations about how proud she was of both her daughters and their upcoming weddings. She wore a new dress that I'd never seen before, something more formal and attention-grabbing than her usual style, suggesting that she'd prepared for tonight as a special performance rather than a simple family celebration. Isn't it wonderful when families support each other through life's biggest moments? Patricia said repeatedly as guests arrived, her voice carrying slightly too much emphasis that made Marcus raise his eyebrows skeptically. Tonight is going to be so special for everyone who believes in the power of sisterly love. Jessica appeared nervous, but beautiful in a flowing dress that complemented the backyard's romantic lighting perfectly. She stayed close to Trevor, who seemed uncomfortable with the attention and energy Patricia was directing toward family dynamics rather than simply celebrating Marcus and my engagement. When I hugged Jessica hello, she whispered that she hoped tonight would go well for everyone, her tone suggesting anxiety about Patricia's plans despite her participation in them. "You look beautiful, Damaris," Jessica said softly, though her eyes didn't quite meet mine as we separated. "I really hope we can work everything out." Extended family members arrived with enthusiasm that seemed slightly forced, as if they'd been coached about appropriate emotional responses for the evening. Aunt Sarah complimented the decorations, while making comments about how wonderful it was to see sisters supporting each other during important life transitions. Uncle David praised Marcus while mentioning how fortunate we were to have family resources that could help us build our future together. "Family is everything," Cousin Maria announced loudly enough for several people to hear as she hugged me. "I can't wait to see how you and Jessica are going to coordinate your wedding planning. Your mother says you have something really special planned." The comments felt rehearsed and oddly specific, confirming that Patricia had indeed prepared our guests for some kind of announcement about financial cooperation between Jessica and me. However, the coaching had been so obvious that Marcus's family immediately noticed the strange emphasis on monetary themes rather than typical engagement celebration topics. Helen Campbell moved smoothly through conversations with extended family members, her nursing background providing excellent skills for assessing social dynamics and identifying people who seemed uncomfortable with the prescribed talking points. She reported back that several relatives appeared confused about why they'd been asked to emphasize financial cooperation rather than simply celebrating our engagement. "Something's definitely planned," Helen whispered during a quiet moment near the appetizer table. "But I think some of your relatives are starting to realize they've been manipulated into participating in something they don't fully understand." Robert engaged William in conversation about work and retirement planning, subtly gathering information about my father's perspective on the evening's agenda. William appeared stressed and uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with both Robert and me, while staying close to Patricia as if seeking protection or guidance about how to navigate the social complexity she'd created. As the party reached its natural rhythm with guests enjoying food and conversation throughout the backyard, I began to relax slightly and enjoy our celebration, despite anticipating Patricia's intervention. Marcus stayed close to my side, providing quiet support while charming our guests with his natural warmth and genuine enthusiasm about our upcoming marriage. The first hour passed peacefully enough that I started hoping Patricia might have reconsidered whatever manipulation she'd planned choosing, instead to simply enjoy her daughter's engagement celebration like a normal mother would. However, her nervous energy and frequent glances toward the house suggested she was still preparing for some kind of dramatic moment that would shift attention toward her agenda. The turning point came when Jessica suddenly stood up from her table and clinked her glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention, with theatrical timing that suggested careful coordination with Patricia. The conversations gradually died down as guests turned toward Jessica with expectant smiles, assuming they were about to hear a traditional maid of honor toast, celebrating her sister's happiness. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Damaris and Marcus." Jessica began, her voice carrying slightly too much projection for the intimate backyard setting. "I know how much it means to them to have family support during this exciting time in their lives." So far, the words seemed appropriate for a sisterly toast, though Jessica's delivery felt more like a speech she'd rehearsed than spontaneous expressions of love and joy. Marcus squeezed my hand as we stood together near the main table, both of us sensing that Jessica's toast was building towards something unexpected. "As most of you know, this has been an incredible year for our family." Jessica continued, her smile becoming brighter and more artificial as she reached the planned transition point in her speech. "Not only is Damaris getting married to this wonderful man, but Trevor and I just got engaged last month." The announcement of Jessica's engagement drew gasps and applause from guests who hadn't known about her relationship milestone. However, instead of maintaining focus on the celebration, Jessica used the surprise to launch into the manipulation that Patricia had clearly scripted for maximum emotional impact. Since we're both planning weddings around the same time, we thought this would be the perfect opportunity to share some exciting news about how we're going to support each other through this amazing journey. Jessica announced, her voice growing more confident as she reached the core of her planned manipulation. The guests' attention focused completely on Jessica as she painted a picture of sisterly cooperation that was entirely fictional, but designed to sound heartwarming and logical to people who didn't understand the financial abuse that had preceded this moment. She described shared wedding planning sessions and mutual resource sharing that would demonstrate family unity while helping both couples achieve their dream celebrations. Damaris has been so successful and generous, and she wants to make sure that both weddings reflect the love and support our family has for each other. Jessica continued, looking directly at me with eyes that dared me to contradict her public narrative. "So we're planning to coordinate our budgets and help each other create the most beautiful celebrations possible." The applause that followed Jessica's announcement was genuine, but based on completely false information that painted me as having already agreed to financial arrangements I'd never discussed. Patricia stood near the house's back door, beaming with satisfaction as she watched guests respond positively to the manipulation that she'd orchestrated perfectly to maximize social pressure while minimizing my ability to refuse without appearing cruel and disappointing. As the clapping died down and guests turned toward me, expectantly waiting for my response to Jessica's announcement, I realized that Patricia's manipulation had reached its crescendo. She'd successfully created a public scenario where refusing to support Jessica's fictional narrative would make me appear selfish and ungrateful in front of extended family members who'd been systematically prepared to expect generous, sisterly cooperation. Standing in my childhood backyard with 50 guests watching expectantly, I felt the weight of Patricia's months-long manipulation campaign crystallizing into this single moment designed to force my compliance through public pressure. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited for me to confirm Jessica's announcement about our supposed financial cooperation, their faces reflecting genuine happiness about what they believed was heartwarming, sisterly support. "That's very sweet of Jessica to think about coordinating our wedding planning," I said, carefully choosing words that acknowledged her statement without confirming the financial implications she'd suggested. "Marcus and I have already finalized our budget based on what we can afford ourselves, but we're certainly happy to share advice and support as Jessica and Trevor plan their own celebration." My diplomatic response clearly wasn't what Patricia had orchestrated, judging by the sharp look she shot toward me from her position near the house. Several guests seemed slightly confused by my measured reaction, rather than the enthusiastic confirmation they'd obviously been led to expect, creating an awkward energy that shifted the party's comfortable atmosphere. Jessica's smile faltered momentarily before she recovered with additional pressure, designed to corner me more explicitly. "Actually, Damaris has been so generous that she's offered to help with more than just advice," she announced, her voice carrying a slight edge that suggested desperation beneath her cheerful facade. "She knows how expensive weddings can be for young couples just starting out." The escalation forced me to choose between publicly contradicting my sister's false statements or allowing the manipulation to continue unchallenged in front of our entire extended family. Marcus stepped slightly closer to my side, his presence providing subtle support while his expression remained carefully neutral for the benefit of confused guests. "I think there might be some misunderstanding about our conversations," I replied firmly but politely, maintaining eye contact with Jessica while addressing the gathered crowd. "Marcus and I are focused on planning a celebration that reflects our values and stays within our personal budget." Patricia chose that moment to step forward from her observation post, her timing calculated to rescue Jessica's failing manipulation attempt, while escalating the pressure to levels that would be harder for me to deflect through diplomatic language. "Don't be so modest, sweetheart," Patricia said with false warmth that barely concealed her desperation as she moved toward the center of attention. "We all know how successful you've been, and family members who have advantages should help those who are struggling during important life moments." The statement was carefully crafted to sound like general wisdom about family loyalty rather than specific demands for my money, but the context made her meaning unmistakably clear to everyone present. Patricia was publicly declaring that my financial success created obligations to support Jessica's wedding expenses, regardless of my own preferences or financial goals. "Family support goes both ways," Helen Campbell interjected smoothly, stepping forward with maternal authority that immediately shifted the dynamic in my favor. "But it should never involve pressure or expectations that make anyone uncomfortable during what should be joyful celebrations." Patricia's expression tightened at Helen's interference in her carefully orchestrated manipulation, though she maintained her sweet facade while assessing this unexpected challenge to her control over the situation. "Of course, family support should be willing," Patricia agreed with false reasonableness, "but I know Damaris well enough to understand how much she loves her sister and wants Jessica to be happy. Sometimes we need encouragement to do what we know is right in our hearts." The manipulation was becoming more obvious as Patricia revealed her true agenda through increasingly direct pressure rather than maintaining the subtle approach that had worked during private conversations. Several guests were beginning to look uncomfortable with the tension underlying what should have been a simple engagement celebration. "Actually, I have something that might help clarify the family's financial situation," Patricia announced, suddenly producing a manila folder that she'd apparently hidden near the house for dramatic effect. I brought some documents that show how family resources should be distributed fairly among both daughters. The folder's contents proved to be the fake legal documents that Patricia had created to support her claims about my savings belonging to a family trust. She presented them with theatrical flourish, explaining to the confused guests that my grandmother had established financial arrangements that required sharing resources between both granddaughters during major life events. These trust documents clearly show that Damaris's savings are actually part of a family fund intended to support both girls equally. Patricia announced opening the folder and displaying official-looking paperwork that appeared legitimate to people who weren't familiar with legal language or trust administration procedures. The fake documents represented a new level of manipulation that went beyond emotional pressure into actual fraud designed to convince witnesses that my financial independence was legally questionable. Patricia was essentially attempting theft through deception while using our engagement party as the venue for her crime. "May I examine those documents?" Robert Campbell asked politely, stepping forward with the professional authority of someone familiar with legal paperwork through his construction business experience. "Trust administration is quite complex, and I'd like to understand the specific provisions being referenced." Patricia hesitated momentarily before handing over the folder, clearly not expecting anyone present to have enough legal knowledge to challenge her fabricated documentation immediately. Robert examined the papers quickly, his expression growing grimmer as he identified obvious forgeries and legal impossibilities. "These documents contain several significant errors." Robert announced calmly, his voice carrying enough authority to command complete attention from every guest in the backyard. "The notary's stamp is from someone who lost their license in 2013, and several referenced statutes don't actually exist in Arizona trust law." The revelation that Patricia had attempted to use fraudulent legal documents to steal my savings sent shocked murmurs through the crowd of relatives who had believed they were witnessing legitimate family financial planning. Patricia's face flushed with embarrassment and anger as her manipulation was exposed publicly in front of people whose opinions she valued. "There must be some mistake," Patricia said, desperately reaching for the documents that Robert continued examining with professional thoroughness. "Those papers came from our family attorney." "No reputable attorney would prepare documents with these kinds of basic errors," Robert replied, firmly maintaining possession of the evidence while addressing the increasingly uncomfortable crowd. "These appear to be fabricated to support claims that have no legal foundation." The exposure of Patricia's fraud marked the point where her manipulation campaign transformed from family pressure into criminal behavior, witnessed by dozens of people who could testify about her willingness to commit document forgery in pursuit of accessing my savings. The fake legal documents proved that her financial desperation had driven her to cross lines that most people would consider unforgivable. Marcus moved closer to my other side as Patricia's desperation became increasingly obvious to everyone present. Her carefully planned manipulation had backfired spectacularly, exposing her true character to extended family members who had previously respected her as a devoted mother supporting her daughter's dreams. "I think we should focus on celebrating Damaris and Marcus rather than discussing complicated financial matters," Uncle David suggested diplomatically, clearly hoping to redirect the party away from the family drama that Patricia had created. However, Patricia was too invested in her manipulation campaign to accept defeat gracefully. The months of planning and the desperate financial pressures driving her behavior prevented her from backing down, even when continuing would obviously damage her relationships with everyone present. "I'm not going to stand here and watch one daughter have everything while the other struggles," Patricia declared, her voice rising with emotion that had shifted from calculated manipulation to genuine desperation. "Damaris has advantages that Jessica doesn't have, and refusing to share them is selfish and wrong. The public accusation that I was selfish for maintaining control over money I'd earned and saved independently finally pushed the confrontation beyond diplomatic resolution into direct conflict that would require clear responses rather than continued attempts at family peacekeeping. The tension in the backyard had reached a breaking point as Patricia's desperation became increasingly visible to our guests. Her mask of maternal concern was slipping away, revealing the manipulative desperation that had driven months of pressure campaigns and now fraudulent document creation. I knew I had to address her accusations directly rather than allowing her to continue painting me as selfish in front of our extended family. "Mom, these documents are fake," I said, clearly keeping my voice calm and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my body. "You created false legal paperwork to try to steal money that I earned and saved independently. That's fraud, and everyone here just witnessed you attempt it." Taking out my phone, I began searching for information about the supposed legal statutes referenced in Patricia's fake documents, speaking loudly enough for nearby guests to hear my findings. The internet search quickly revealed that 2 of the cited laws had never existed in Arizona legal code, while the third had been repealed over a decade ago. The Arizona Revised Statute Section 43-1157 that these documents reference was repealed in 2008. I announced, showing my phone screen to several guests who gathered closer to examine the evidence. And the family trust provisions cited in paragraph 3 reference federal regulations that were never enacted into law. The legal inconsistencies were obvious enough that anyone with basic internet access could verify them, independently destroying any remaining credibility Patricia's fake documents might have possessed among guests who had been uncertain about the family dynamics they were witnessing. The notary stamp belongs to Sandra Mitchell, who lost her license in 2013 for participating in real estate fraud. I continued my voice gaining strength as I systematically demolished Patricia's fabricated evidence. These documents couldn't be legitimate even if the legal references were accurate. Patricia watched her carefully constructed manipulation campaign crumble in real time as guests began murmuring among themselves about the obvious fraud they had witnessed. Several relatives pulled out their own phones to verify the legal information I was sharing, confirming my findings and expressing shock that Patricia had attempted such elaborate deception during what should have been a joyful family celebration. "This is ridiculous," Patricia said desperately, her voice rising with panic as she realized that her manipulation had not only failed, but had exposed her to potential criminal charges in front of dozens of witnesses. "You're being deliberately difficult about helping your own sister because you're jealous of her happiness." The accusation that I was jealous of Jessica rang hollow after the evidence of systematic financial fraud that Patricia had just attempted. Guests who might have been swayed by emotional appeals about sisterly love were now witnessing criminal behavior that went far beyond family disputes about money. "I'm not jealous of Jessica, and this isn't about her happiness," I replied firmly, maintaining eye contact with Patricia while addressing the broader audience that she had recruited for her manipulation campaign. "This is about you creating fake legal documents to steal money from your own daughter. That's not family support. That's financial abuse." Marcus stepped closer to my side as Patricia's face contorted with rage that she could no longer contain behind her facade of maternal concern. The public exposure of her fraud had triggered desperation that was making her increasingly unpredictable and potentially dangerous. "How dare you accuse me of abusing you?" Patricia screamed, abandoning all pretense of reasonable behavior as her manipulation campaign collapsed completely. "I've sacrificed everything for both of my daughters, and this is how you repay my love and devotion." Helen Campbell moved closer to our group, her maternal instincts recognizing that Patricia's escalating desperation might lead to behavior that could harm me emotionally or even physically. Robert maintained possession of the fraudulent documents while positioning himself to intervene if Patricia's rage turned toward violence against anyone present. "You sacrificed my college fund to pay for Jessica's dance lessons without my knowledge or consent." I stated clearly, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent backyard as guests absorbed the revelation about long-term financial abuse. You've been stealing from me for over a decade, and now you're trying to steal my wedding fund through fake legal documents. That's not sacrifice, that's theft. The systematic financial abuse that I described painted a picture of manipulation that went far beyond current wedding planning pressures into years of exploitation that had shaped my entire relationship with money and family trust. Guests who had been prepared to support reasonable family financial cooperation were now confronting evidence of criminal behavior that demanded completely different responses. "You're lying," Patricia shrieked, though her denial carried no conviction since the evidence of her fraud was literally being held by Robert Campbell, while dozens of witnesses had watched her present fake documents as legitimate family legal arrangements. "You've always been ungrateful for everything your father and I have done for you. I'm grateful for the love and support I've received," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I remained, despite Patricia's escalating hysteria. "But I won't be grateful for theft, manipulation, and fraud committed against me by someone who should have protected me instead of exploiting me." Patricia's face had turned red with rage as she realized that her years of financial manipulation were being exposed to our entire extended family in terms that made her behavior sound criminal rather than maternal. The guests she had recruited to pressure me were now witnesses to her attempted fraud and admission of past financial abuse. "I gave up my dreams to raise you," Patricia screamed, her voice becoming shrill with desperation as she searched for emotional weapons that might still manipulate the situation in her favor. "I could have been a professional dancer if I hadn't had to sacrifice my career for motherhood, and you owe me compensation for everything I lost." The revelation that Patricia viewed motherhood as a sacrifice requiring financial compensation from her adult children provided final confirmation of the twisted thinking that had driven years of financial abuse disguised as family love and support. No parent should expect their children to compensate them financially for choosing to have a family, Helen Campbell said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had raised children without exploiting them for personal gain. That's not how healthy family relationships work. Patricia spun toward Helen with fury that had been building throughout the evening as the Campbell family interfered with her manipulation attempts. Her rage at having her authority challenged by outsiders who didn't accept her version of family obligations finally erupted into physical violence that shocked everyone present. "Stay out of my family's business!" Patricia snarled before turning back to face me with uncontrolled rage distorting her features. "And you need to learn some respect for the woman who gave birth to you and raised you." The slap came so suddenly that I didn't have time to duck or defend myself. Patricia's open palm connected with my left cheek with enough force to make a sound that echoed across the suddenly silent backyard, leaving a stinging burn that brought tears to my eyes from both physical pain and emotional devastation. The crack of skin against skin seemed impossibly loud in the spring evening air as 50 guests watched in stunned horror, while my own mother physically attacked me during my engagement celebration. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear traffic from the street beyond our backyard fence and the distant sound of someone's dog barking several blocks away. My hand moved automatically to my burning cheek as I stared at Patricia's face, watching her expression shift from rage to immediate shock as she realized what she had just done in front of dozens of witnesses. The slap had been impulsive rather than calculated, driven by desperation that had overwhelmed her ability to maintain even basic social appropriateness. "Oh my God," someone whispered from the crowd of guests, though I couldn't identify who had spoken through the ringing in my ears and the emotional numbness that was beginning to replace the initial shock of being physically attacked by my own mother. Patricia's face showed instant regret mixed with continued rage as she struggled to process what she had just done to her own daughter during what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. Her hand was still raised from the follow-through of her slap, trembling slightly as the magnitude of her action began to penetrate her desperate consciousness. Marcus moved immediately to my side, his arm encircling my waist with protective warmth, while his other hand gently touched my shoulder in comfort and support. His presence anchored me to reality when shock threatened to overwhelm my ability to think clearly about how to respond to this unprecedented family violence. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice filled with concern and barely controlled anger at witnessing the woman who had given birth to me attack me during our engagement celebration. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure that was entirely true. The physical pain from the slap was manageable, but the emotional devastation of being physically attacked by my own mother in front of our extended family felt like it might take years to fully process and heal from. Looking around the backyard, I saw faces reflecting shock, anger, and discomfort as our guests struggled to understand how a family celebration had deteriorated into public violence and fraud accusations. Several relatives were already gathering their belongings, clearly uncomfortable, remaining at a party where they had witnessed criminal behavior and family violence. Patricia stood frozen with her hand still partially raised her face, cycling through emotions as she processed what she had done while searching for words that might somehow repair the damage she had inflicted on our relationship and her reputation among family members who had previously respected her. The moment stretched endlessly as I realized that everything between Patricia and me had fundamentally changed with that slap. There would be no returning to previous family dynamics or finding ways to manage her manipulation through diplomatic boundaries. She had crossed a line that made continued relationship impossible, regardless of any apologies or explanations she might offer. As feeling returned to my shocked system, I felt something unexpected rising within me. Not anger or hurt, but clarity and strength that came from finally understanding exactly who Patricia was and what our relationship had always been beneath the surface, pretenses of maternal love and family loyalty. Standing in my childhood backyard with my hand pressed against my stinging cheek, I felt a strange sense of finality settling over me like Arizona twilight. The woman who had given birth to me had just physically attacked me during my engagement party in front of 50 witnesses after attempting fraud to steal my life savings. There was nothing left to salvage from our relationship, and I finally felt free to say what needed to be said. Patricia remained frozen with her hand still partially raised her face, cycling through shock and regret as the magnitude of her action penetrated her desperate consciousness. The guests stood in stunned silence, most holding drinks or plates they'd forgotten about while watching family drama unfold into actual violence that none of them had expected to witness. "You know what, Mom?" I said quietly, my voice carrying across the silent backyard with perfect clarity despite speaking barely above a whisper. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn your love and approval, sacrificing my own needs and security to meet your impossible expectations." Patricia lowered her hand slowly, her expression shifting toward fear as she began to understand that this moment was bigger than a temporary argument that could be resolved through her usual manipulation tactics. Something fundamental had changed in my voice and posture that signaled the end of her ability to control me through guilt and family obligations. "I gave you my college fund when you said Jessica needed dance lessons. I worked 3 jobs to pay my way through school when most kids my age were focused on studying and building friendships. I saved every penny for years living like a poverty-stricken student, even after getting a good job, because I wanted to build a secure future that no one could take away from me." My voice remained calm and steady despite tears streaming down my face, carrying the weight of decades of financial abuse and emotional manipulation that had finally culminated in physical violence during what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. "I gave you chance after chance to treat me with basic respect and recognize my right to make my own financial decisions. Instead, you escalated your demands, recruited my sister to blackmail me, created fake legal documents to steal from me, and now you've physically attacked me during my engagement celebration." Marcus's arm around my waist provided steady support while Helen and Robert Campbell flanked us like protective parents, their presence reminding me that I had family who loved me without conditions or price tags attached to their support. This isn't about money anymore. I continued looking directly into Patricia's eyes with clarity that cut through years of manipulation and false family narratives. This is about the fact that you have never loved me as a daughter. You've only seen me as a resource to be exploited for your own purposes and Jessica's dreams. Patricia's mouth opened as if to protest, but no words emerged as she confronted the truth about her relationship with me that she had probably never acknowledged even to herself. Her maternal love had always been conditional on my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for the family's financial convenience, particularly funding Jessica's expensive pursuits. A real mother would have been proud of my academic success instead of viewing it as evidence that I could support myself without family help. A real mother would have protected my college fund instead of stealing it for my sister's dance career. A real mother would have celebrated my engagement instead of trying to manipulate me into financing someone else's wedding. The words came easily because they represented thoughts I'd been suppressing for years under layers of family loyalty and daughter guilt. Speaking them aloud in front of witnesses felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for decades. A real mother certainly wouldn't have slapped her daughter during her engagement party for refusing to be financially abused. I concluded my voice-carrying finality that made several guests shift uncomfortably as they realized they were witnessing the permanent dissolution of a mother-daughter relationship. Patricia finally found her voice, though it emerged as a desperate whisper rather than her usual confident manipulation. "Damaris, honey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hit you. I was just so frustrated and worried about our family's financial situation." The apology felt hollow because it focused on the physical slap rather than acknowledging the systematic financial abuse that had led to this moment. Patricia was still trying to frame the situation as temporary family stress rather than accepting responsibility for years of deliberate exploitation disguised as maternal guidance. "Your apology doesn't change anything," I replied simply. "The slap was just the final symbol of what our relationship has always been. You've been hurting me financially and emotionally for years. Tonight you just made it physical in front of everyone we know." Looking around the backyard at relatives who had witnessed the entire confrontation, I realized that many of them were beginning to understand the true dynamics they had been recruited to support. Aunt Sarah looked horrified as she processed how Patricia had manipulated her into pressuring me about family financial obligations. Uncle David was staring at Patricia with obvious disapproval after witnessing her fraud attempt and physical violence. "I'm done," I announced, clearly addressing both Patricia and the assembled guests who needed to understand that my decision was final and non-negotiable. "I'm done being manipulated, exploited, and abused by someone who should have loved and protected me unconditionally." Marcus squeezed my waist gently, silently communicating his complete support for whatever decision I needed to make about my biological family relationships. His presence reminded me that I had people in my life who loved me for who I was rather than what I could provide financially. "I'm done pretending that blood relations matter more than actual love and respect. I'm done sacrificing my security and happiness to fund other people's dreams. And I'm done allowing family guilt to override my right to make my own decisions about my money and my life." The declaration felt like setting down a massive weight I'd been carrying since childhood, finally acknowledging that family relationships should enhance rather than diminish the people involved. Patricia's manipulation had damaged my ability to trust my own judgment and recognize my worth as an individual rather than a family resource. "Now you've lost the money," I said, making eye contact with Patricia one final time before turning toward the house to leave my childhood home forever and me. The finality in those words sent visible shock through Patricia's system as she realized that her manipulation campaign hadn't just failed. It had destroyed any possibility of maintaining a relationship with her older daughter. Her desperate attempts to access my savings had cost her something far more valuable than $50,000. As Marcus and I walked toward the house together, followed by Helen and Robert Campbell, who had immediately shifted into protective mode, I heard Patricia begin to cry behind us. However, her tears felt manipulative rather than genuinely sorrowful, one final attempt to make me feel guilty for establishing boundaries that protected my financial and emotional well-being. "Wait!" Jessica called suddenly, her voice cracking with emotion that sounded different from anything I'd heard from her during the months of manipulation. "Please wait, Damaris." I turned to see my sister standing near the table where she'd delivered her manipulative speech. Earlier in the evening, tears streaming down her face as she struggled with words that seemed to be fighting their way past years of conditioning and fear. "I'm sorry," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible across the distance between us. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was scared of what would happen if I didn't do what Mom asked me to do." The admission that Jessica had been afraid of Patricia rather than willingly participating in the manipulation campaign added another layer of complexity to the family dynamics that were being exposed during our ruined engagement celebration. She told me that if I didn't help pressure you for money, she would cut me off financially and refuse to support my relationship with Trevor. Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger as she found courage to reveal the truth about her participation in the blackmail campaign. She said I was ungrateful and selfish if I didn't use our sisterly relationship to help solve the family's financial problems. The revelation that Patricia had been manipulating Jessica through threats and emotional abuse, similar to what she'd used against me throughout my life, shifted my understanding of recent events completely. Jessica hadn't been a willing partner in the manipulation. She'd been another victim of Patricia's systematic exploitation. She made me record our conversations and threatened to kick me out of the house if I didn't follow her script about the wedding money. Jessica sobbed, pulling her phone out and deleting files as she spoke. I was so scared of losing my family that I let her turn me into someone I hate. The breakdown of Patricia's manipulation campaign was revealing victims beyond just me, exposing years of psychological abuse that had damaged both daughters in different ways, while serving Patricia's need to control every aspect of our family's financial and emotional dynamics. As Jessica's confession continued, other family members who had witnessed the entire confrontation began stepping forward with their own revelations about Patricia's manipulation campaigns that had been operating beneath the surface of our family relationships for years. The systematic nature of her financial abuse was becoming clear as relatives shared experiences they had previously kept private out of family loyalty. Aunt Sarah approached our group, hesitantly wringing her hands as she prepared to admit her own experience with Patricia's financial manipulation. "Damaris, I need to tell you something that's been bothering me for months." She began, glancing nervously toward Patricia, who was still standing frozen near the center of the backyard. "Your mother borrowed $5,000 from me last spring, claiming that Jessica needed emergency dental work that wasn't covered by insurance." Aunt Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as she realized the importance of sharing her story. "But I saw Jessica at the family reunion 2 months later, and her teeth looked exactly the same as always. When I asked about her recovery, she had no idea what I was talking about." The revelation that Patricia had been lying to extended family members about medical emergencies to extract money that was actually funding Jessica's wedding plans demonstrated a level of systematic deception that went far beyond family financial disagreements into actual fraud against multiple victims. Cousin Michael stepped forward, next, his expression grim as he prepared to share his own experience with Patricia's manipulation tactics. "She's been calling me for months, asking me to hire Jessica for modeling jobs at my advertising agency," he admitted, avoiding eye contact with Jessica, who looked mortified about her mother's interference in her career prospects. "I kept explaining that Jessica doesn't have the experience or portfolio for professional modeling work, but your mother insisted that family businesses should support family members regardless of qualifications." Michael continued, She suggested that I owed it to the family to create opportunities for Jessica, even if it meant compromising my professional standards. Uncle David joined the growing circle of relatives, sharing their experiences with Patricia's pressure campaigns, revealing how she had approached him about investing in Jessica's various business ideas over the years. She wanted me to fund a dance studio that Jessica was supposed to manage, then a fitness blog, then some kind of online boutique selling dance accessories. He explained, shaking his head at the memory of persistent requests that had made family gatherings uncomfortable. Every time I tried to ask about business plans or financial projections, your mother accused me of not believing in Jessica's potential and being unsupportive of young entrepreneurs. David continued. She made it sound like I was crushing Jessica's dreams by asking basic questions about how these businesses would actually work. The pattern emerging from these revelations showed that Patricia had been systematically approaching every family member with resources using different stories and emotional manipulation tactics tailored to each person's vulnerabilities and relationship dynamics. Her campaign to access my wedding fund was just the most recent and desperate phase of years of financial predation disguised as family support. Helen Campbell listened to each revelation with the professional assessment skills she'd developed through decades of nursing, recognizing the psychological patterns that indicated systematic abuse rather than isolated incidents of family financial stress. "This is textbook financial abuse," she said quietly, addressing the group of relatives who were beginning to understand how they'd been manipulated. Abusers typically isolate their victims by making each person think they're the only one experiencing problems. Helen explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone trained to recognize abuse patterns in family systems. They use different stories with different people to prevent anyone from seeing the full scope of their manipulation campaigns. Robert Campbell added practical perspective about the legal implications of the fraud they had all witnessed, explaining that documented attempts to use fake legal documents to steal money constituted serious crimes that could result in criminal charges regardless of family relationships. The fake trust documents alone could result in fraud charges, and the systematic deception used to extract money from multiple family members under false pretenses adds elements of identity theft and wire fraud if any electronic communications were involved, Robert explained to the gathering group of Patricia's victims. William finally approached our group, his face showing exhaustion and shame as he prepared to admit his role in enabling Patricia's manipulation campaigns through passive cooperation and willful ignorance about her increasingly desperate financial schemes. "I knew about the refinancing," he said quietly, unable to meet anyone's eyes as he confessed his complicity in the financial abuse that had been destroying our family. "I knew we were spending money we didn't have on Jessica's activities, but your mother convinced me that it was temporary and that Jessica would eventually earn enough to pay everything back." His admission that he had known about their mounting debt while allowing Patricia to pressure family members for money revealed another layer of betrayal that had enabled the systematic abuse to continue unchallenged for years. She told me that asking family for help was normal and that successful people have obligations to support relatives who are struggling. William continued, his voice filled with regret for accepting rationalizations that had allowed Patricia's behavior to escalate into criminal fraud attempts. "I was afraid of standing up to her because she threatened to leave me if I interfered with her support for Jessica's career," he admitted, revealing the same fear-based compliance that had trapped Jessica in participating in manipulation campaigns against me. The gathering testimonies painted a complete picture of financial abuse that had damaged multiple family relationships while serving Patricia's need to fund an unsustainable lifestyle centered around Jessica's various pursuits. Each family member had been isolated and manipulated individually, preventing them from recognizing the pattern until tonight's public confrontation had exposed the full scope of Patricia's systematic deception. Jessica approached our group slowly, her earlier confession having opened emotional floodgates that were allowing years of suppressed truth to emerge, despite her fear of Patricia's reaction. "There's something else you all need to know," she said, her voice trembling as she prepared to reveal information that would complete the picture of their family's financial crisis. Mom made me apply for credit cards using the family's address and my social security number. Then she used them to pay for wedding vendors without telling me. Jessica confessed producing several credit card statements that showed balances totaling over $15,000. She said it was temporary and that Damaris would pay everything off once she agreed to share her wedding fund. The revelation that Patricia had been creating debt in Jessica's name without her knowledge added identity theft to the growing list of financial crimes they had all witnessed, demonstrating how far Patricia's desperation had pushed her beyond normal family dysfunction into actual criminal behavior. As the full scope of Patricia's manipulation campaigns became clear to everyone present, the relatives who had been recruited to pressure me about family financial obligations began expressing horror and regret about their unwitting participation in systematic abuse that had been disguised as family loyalty and support. The engagement party that was supposed to celebrate my future with Marcus had transformed into an intervention that exposed years of family financial abuse while providing me with witnesses and evidence that would support any legal action I might choose to pursue against Patricia for her systematic exploitation and fraud. The weeks following our disastrous engagement party brought a strange combination of grief and relief as I processed the complete dissolution of my relationship with Patricia, while embracing the genuine family love that the Campbells offered without conditions or manipulation. The contrast between healthy and dysfunctional family dynamics became stark as I experienced what family relationships could be when built on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation. Helen's offer of legal adoption moved forward quickly with the assistance of Robert's attorney, who specializes in family law and had experience with adult adoption cases involving abuse survivors. The legal process required extensive documentation about the financial manipulation and emotional abuse I'd experienced, creating an official record that would protect me from future harassment, while symbolically formalizing my transition into a family that actually functioned with love and support. Marcus threw himself into wedding planning with enthusiasm that helped distract both of us from the family trauma while creating positive focus on our future together. His excitement about our upcoming marriage and integration into his family provided healing energy that gradually replaced the anxiety and hypervigilance that had characterized my interactions with Patricia and Jessica. However, the most shocking discovery came during the legal process when Robert's attorney uncovered information that transformed my understanding of the financial abuse I'd experienced throughout my life. While researching my family's financial history to support the adoption petition, the attorney found evidence of an inheritance that Patricia had been hiding from me for over 10 years. Your grandmother, Maria Rodriguez, established a trust fund specifically for your wedding or first home purchase, the attorney explained during a meeting in her office presenting documentation that made my hands shake as I read the details. The trust currently holds $78,000, including accumulated interest from the original $50,000 deposit made when you turned 18. The discovery that my grandmother had intended to provide financial support for my wedding, while Patricia was simultaneously manipulating me about money, created a devastating picture of betrayal that went even deeper than I'd realized. Not only had Patricia stolen my college fund and pressured me for my saved money, but she'd been illegally accessing an inheritance specifically designated for my wedding expenses. The trust documents clearly state that the funds should be released to you upon engagement or marriage, with backup provisions for first home purchase if you chose not to marry. The attorney continued showing me my grandmother's handwritten letter explaining her intentions for the inheritance. Reading my grandmother's words about wanting to support my independence and happiness brought tears that mixed grief for losing her with rage about Patricia's theft of her intended gift. The letter revealed that my grandmother had specifically worried about family financial manipulation and had designed the trust to protect me from the exact exploitation that Patricia had been perpetrating for years. Your mother has been accessing the trust funds through forged documents claiming family financial emergencies. The attorney explained, presenting bank records that showed systematic withdrawals over the past decade. She's stolen approximately $35,000 from your inheritance while lying about its existence. The theft of my grandmother's gift represented a level of betrayal that felt almost impossible to process emotionally. Patricia hadn't just manipulated me for my own money, she'd been stealing money that my deceased grandmother had specifically intended to protect me from financial exploitation while lying to me about its existence for over 10 years. Legal action to recover the stolen inheritance began immediately with criminal charges filed for trust fraud, identity theft, and forgery related to the fake documents Patricia had used to access funds illegally. The systematic nature of her financial crimes provided prosecutors with clear evidence that would likely result in significant legal consequences regardless of our family relationships. Jessica reached out to me several times during this period, her attempts at communication revealing genuine remorse and desire to rebuild our relationship despite the manipulation that had damaged our trust. Her messages included apologies for her participation in Patricia's pressure campaigns and explanations about the fear-based compliance that had trapped her in perpetuating abuse against me. "I know I hurt you terribly, and I understand if you never want to speak to me again," Jessica wrote in a letter that arrived 2 weeks after the engagement party. "But I want you to know that I love you, and I'm trying to get help to understand how our family dynamics became so toxic and destructive." Her letter revealed that she had started therapy to address the psychological manipulation she'd experienced and was working to establish financial independence from Patricia to prevent future exploitation. She'd also broken up with Trevor after realizing that their relationship had been built on financial stress and family pressure rather than genuine compatibility. "I applied for my own apartment and a full-time job because I finally understand that depending on Mom for financial support means allowing her to control every aspect of my life," Jessica continued. "I want to become someone you could be proud to call your sister, even if it takes years to repair the damage I helped create." The therapeutic work Jessica was doing provided hope that our relationship might eventually be rebuilt on healthier foundations, though I knew it would require time and consistent demonstration of changed behavior rather than just apologies and good intentions. Marcus and I decided to postpone our original wedding plans to allow time for the legal proceedings and family trauma recovery, while also taking advantage of my recovered inheritance to plan a celebration that truly reflected our values and dreams. The additional funds meant we could focus on creating meaningful experiences rather than compromising our vision due to budget constraints. "I want our wedding to represent the family we're choosing rather than the dysfunction we're leaving behind," Marcus said during one of our planning sessions at Helen and Robert's kitchen table. "Let's create something beautiful that celebrates love and support rather than obligation and manipulation." Helen's guidance proved invaluable as I navigated the complex emotions of grieving the mother I'd wanted while celebrating my freedom from the mother I'd actually had. Her own experience with family manipulation provided practical strategies for managing guilt, anger, and sadness, while building new relationship patterns based on healthy boundaries and mutual respect. Choosing your own family doesn't mean you failed with your biological family, Helen reminded me during particularly difficult moments. It means you recognize the difference between love and control, and you chose love. The legal adoption process concluded 3 months after our engagement party with a small ceremony at the courthouse that felt more meaningful than many traditional weddings. Standing between Helen and Robert while officially becoming their daughter provided closure on decades of seeking parental love from people who were incapable of providing it unconditionally. As autumn approached and our wedding planning gained momentum, I felt genuinely excited about celebrating our marriage, surrounded by people who supported our happiness without expecting anything in return. The contrast with the stress and manipulation that had characterized family interactions with Patricia made every moment of wedding planning feel like a gift of peace and joy. 6 months after our engagement party, Patricia's legal troubles had escalated into serious criminal charges that would likely result in prison time for the systematic financial fraud that investigators had uncovered during their examination of her manipulation campaigns. The forensic accounting revealed a decade-long pattern of identity theft, document forgery, and fraud that affected not only our immediate family, but also extended relatives and family friends who had been systematically deceived. The investigation uncovered additional victims beyond our family circle, including elderly neighbors who had loaned Patricia money for supposed emergency home repairs that never occurred, and local business owners who had been convinced to extend credit for Jessica's various entrepreneurial ventures based on fabricated financial documentation. The scope of Patricia's deception demonstrated sophisticated criminal behavior rather than desperate maternal love gone wrong. Jessica's decision to testify against Patricia in court required tremendous courage, given years of psychological manipulation and fear-based conditioning that had shaped her understanding of family loyalty. However, her therapy progress had helped her recognize that protecting other victims was more important than maintaining silence to preserve a relationship built on manipulation and abuse. "I know testifying against my own mother seems terrible," Jessica explained during one of our carefully rebuilding conversations over coffee, "but I've learned that real family members protect each other from harm instead of perpetuating it. Mom needs to face consequences for her actions before she can get the help she needs." Jessica's testimony proved crucial in establishing the pattern of psychological manipulation that had enabled Patricia's financial crimes to continue unchallenged for so many years. Her detailed descriptions of the fear tactics, emotional blackmail, and systematic isolation Patricia used to control family members helped prosecutors demonstrate that the fraud had been deliberately planned rather than impulsively committed during temporary financial stress. The court proceedings also revealed that William had finally found the courage to leave Patricia and file for divorce after decades of passive enabling that had allowed her manipulation campaigns to damage both of his daughters. His decision to separate from Patricia and seek individual therapy demonstrated recognition of his own complicity in the family dysfunction. "I should have protected both of you from her manipulation years ago," William admitted during a supervised visit arranged through our attorneys. "I was so afraid of conflict and losing my marriage that I sacrificed my daughter's well-being to keep peace with someone who was fundamentally abusing our entire family." His genuine remorse and commitment to therapeutic change provided hope for eventual reconciliation, though I maintained careful boundaries while he worked to understand and address the passive, enabling behaviors that had allowed Patricia's abuse to escalate over decades. The legal proceedings concluded with Patricia's conviction on multiple felony charges, including trust fraud, identity theft, and document forgery, that resulted in a 3-year prison sentence plus restitution requirements for all the money she had stolen from various victims. The judge's sentencing statement emphasized that family relationships don't excuse financial crimes, and that Patricia's systematic exploitation of emotional bonds made her behavior particularly reprehensible. The defendant used her position as a mother and family member to manipulate victims who trusted her, creating long-lasting psychological damage alongside the financial harm, the judge stated during sentencing. "This court will not treat family financial abuse as less serious than crimes committed by strangers." Patricia's conviction provided legal validation for years of abuse, while ensuring that she couldn't continue manipulating family members or other potential victims during her incarceration. The restitution orders would require her to repay stolen money to all identified victims, though the amounts involved exceeded her probable lifetime earning capacity. Jessica's transformation during the months following Patricia's arrest demonstrated remarkable psychological resilience as she worked to rebuild her identity independent from their mother's manipulation and control. Her therapy progress included recognizing how Patricia's favoritism had been another form of abuse that had prevented Jessica from developing genuine self-worth and healthy relationship patterns. I'm learning that being the golden child wasn't actually love, Jessica shared during one of our reconciliation conversations. Mom used my insecurities and need for approval to turn me into a weapon against you, and that damaged both of us in different ways. Her insight about the toxic nature of favoritism helped explain why Patricia's manipulation had been so effective in pitting us against each other, rather than encouraging genuine sisterly support and cooperation. Jessica's willingness to examine her own role in perpetuating family dysfunction demonstrated the kind of personal growth that made rebuilding our relationship possible. The wedding planning that Marcus and I resumed during the legal proceedings became a healing process that helped us focus on positive future building, rather than remaining stuck in family trauma and dysfunction. Using my recovered inheritance alongside our saved funds allowed us to create a celebration that honored our values while symbolically representing our choice to build relationships based on love rather than obligation. Jessica's participation in our wedding planning provided opportunities for trust building and relationship repair, as she demonstrated changed behavior rather than just offering apologies for past manipulation. Her enthusiasm for supporting our happiness without expecting anything in return marked a fundamental shift from the family dynamics that had characterized our earlier relationship. "I want to be the sister you deserve to have all along," Jessica said while helping me choose flowers for the ceremony. "Not because Mom told me to pressure you about something, but because I genuinely love you and want you to be happy." The contrast between Jessica's current behavior and her earlier blackmail attempts demonstrated how much growth was possible when someone committed to genuine change rather than continuing patterns learned during childhood in a dysfunctional family system. Helen and Robert's support throughout the legal proceedings and wedding planning provided a stable foundation that allowed me to process family trauma while celebrating my future with Marcus. Their unconditional love and protection created safety that I'd never experienced with my biological family, demonstrating what healthy parental relationships could provide. As our wedding date approached, I felt grateful for the painful experiences that had ultimately led to freedom from manipulation and discovery of genuine family love. The contrast between Patricia's conditional support and the Campbells' unconditional acceptance had taught me to recognize the difference between real love and emotional exploitation. The legal justice that held Patricia accountable for her crimes provided closure that allowed me to focus on building positive relationships rather than remaining stuck in cycles of abuse and manipulation. Her conviction demonstrated that family connections don't excuse criminal behavior, and that victims have the right to seek protection from abuse regardless of biological relationships. 1 year after that devastating engagement party, Marcus and I stood together in the botanical gardens outside Phoenix, surrounded by desert flowers and the people who truly loved us without conditions or hidden agendas. Our wedding day had finally arrived, and it was everything I dreamed of during those years of careful saving and hopeful planning. The ceremony was intimate and meaningful, with only 75 guests who were there to celebrate our happiness, rather than advance their own agendas or extract financial benefits from our celebration. Helen Campbell walked me down the aisle in her new official role as my adoptive mother, her arm linked with mine, providing the parental support I'd always wanted but never received from Patricia. Jessica served as my maid of honor, a decision that represented the genuine reconciliation we'd built through months of honest communication and therapeutic work. Her presence beside me symbolized our mutual commitment to breaking the cycle of family manipulation and building a sisterly relationship based on love rather than competition for parental resources. "You look absolutely radiant," Jessica whispered as we prepared for the ceremony, her eyes bright with tears of genuine happiness rather than the manipulative emotions that had characterized her earlier behavior. "I'm so proud of the strength you showed during everything we went through, and I'm honored that you're giving me the chance to be a real sister to you." The transformation in our relationship provided hope that family dysfunction doesn't have to be permanent when people commit to genuine change and therapeutic growth. Jessica's willingness to examine her own behavior and make amends had created space for trust to rebuild gradually over time. William attended the ceremony as my father, though our relationship remained carefully boundaried as he continued working to understand his role in enabling decades of family financial abuse. His presence represented forgiveness rather than forgotten harm, acknowledging that people can change while protecting myself from potential future manipulation. "I know I can't undo the years when I failed to protect you," William said during our brief conversation before the ceremony, "but I want you to know how proud I am of your courage in breaking free from dysfunction that I was too weak to challenge. You saved not just yourself, but probably all of us." His recognition of my strength in establishing boundaries provided validation that helped heal some of the abandonment wounds created by his passive enabling of Patricia's abuse throughout my childhood and young adulthood. The wedding itself was funded entirely by my recovered inheritance and our joint savings, representing financial independence from manipulation and the security that comes from building resources through honest work rather than emotional exploitation. Every vendor had been chosen based on quality and value rather than desperation and family pressure. Marcus's vows brought tears to everyone present as he spoke about admiring my courage in choosing love over fear boundaries, over people-pleasing and genuine family connections, over biological obligations. His words honored the difficult journey that had led us to this celebration while affirming his commitment to protecting our relationship from future manipulation. "I promise to always support your right to make decisions about your money, your time, and your energy, without pressure or guilt from anyone, including me," Marcus said, his voice carrying conviction that demonstrated his understanding of how financial abuse had shaped my past experiences with family relationships. My own vows focused on gratitude for discovering the difference between conditional and unconditional love, while committing to building a marriage based on mutual respect rather than exploitation or control. Speaking those words in front of people who genuinely supported our happiness felt like final liberation from years of family dysfunction. "You've taught me that real love doesn't come with price tags or hidden agendas," I said to Marcus while looking into his eyes. "You've shown me that healthy relationships enhance rather than diminish the people involved, and that family should be a source of strength rather than constant stress." The reception celebration was joyful and relaxed, filled with dancing laughter and conversations that focused on future dreams rather than past traumas or family obligations. Guests shared stories about Marcus and me that highlighted our individual strengths and mutual compatibility rather than discussing our utility as family resources. Helen and Robert's toast as my adoptive parents emphasized themes of chosen family and the importance of surrounding ourselves with people who celebrate our success rather than resenting it. Their words provided public recognition of the family bonds we'd built through love rather than biology. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to seek the love we deserve, rather than accepting the love we've always known, Helen said, raising her glass toward Marcus and me. Damaris found that courage, and now she's building the family she was always meant to have. During the reception, I received a brief letter that had been delivered to the venue postmarked from the correctional facility, where Patricia was serving her sentence for financial fraud. The letter was short and focused on her regret about losing our relationship rather than accepting responsibility for the criminal behavior that had destroyed it. "I hope someday you'll understand that everything I did came from love even if my methods were wrong," Patricia had written. "I miss you every day and pray that you'll forgive me when I've served my time." The letter demonstrated that Patricia still didn't understand the difference between love and control, viewing her financial manipulation as misguided maternal care, rather than recognizing it as systematic abuse that had damaged multiple victims. Her inability to accept full responsibility suggested that reconciliation would remain impossible until she developed genuine insight about her behavior. However, reading her words during my wedding reception felt different than it would have a year earlier. Instead of guilt or confusion, I felt clarity about the choice I'd made to prioritize my well-being over family dysfunction. Patricia's continued manipulation attempts only reinforced the wisdom of establishing permanent boundaries. Marcus and I had decided to use the remaining funds from my inheritance as a down payment on our first home, creating the stable foundation that my grandmother had hoped to provide when she established the trust fund. Her gift was finally serving its intended purpose of supporting my independence and happiness. As our wedding reception wound down and Marcus and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon in Colorado with his extended family, I reflected on the profound life lesson that had emerged from the most difficult year of my adult life. The lesson wasn't simply about money or family relationships, but about the fundamental importance of recognizing our own worth and protecting it from people who would exploit our love and loyalty for their own purposes. Real family members celebrate each other's success rather than resenting it. They offer support without strings attached and respect boundaries even when they're disappointed by decisions they don't understand. Most importantly, I learned that choosing your own emotional and financial well-being over family dysfunction isn't selfish. It's necessary for building the kind of life where genuine love and happiness can flourish. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in relationships that diminish your worth or exploit your resources. Setting boundaries with toxic people, even when they're family members, creates space for healthy relationships to develop and provides protection that allows personal growth rather than constant survival mode. The pain of disappointing family members who expect you to sacrifice yourself for their convenience is temporary, but the damage from allowing ongoing exploitation compounds over time. Building chosen family with people who support your growth and celebrate your success provides the foundation for emotional healing while demonstrating what healthy relationships actually look like when they're based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. As Marcus and I drove away from our wedding reception toward our future together, I felt profound gratitude for the painful experiences that had ultimately led to liberation from family dysfunction and discovery of genuine love. The contrast between Patricia's conditional support and the unconditional acceptance I'd found with Marcus and his family had taught me to recognize the difference between real love and emotional exploitation. The $50,000 wedding fund that had triggered months of family manipulation had served its true purpose, protecting my independence and providing resources for the celebration I deserved with people who genuinely wanted my happiness. The money I'd saved through years of discipline and sacrifice had bought me freedom from financial abuse and a future built on my own terms. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? The decision to protect yourself from manipulation isn't always easy, but it's often necessary for building the life you truly deserve. If you found strength in this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content about overcoming family dysfunction and building healthy relationships. Share this story with anyone who might need encouragement to establish boundaries with toxic family members. Thank you for listening to my journey from manipulation to freedom, and I hope my experience helps you recognize your own worth and demand the respect you deserve. Remember that you have the right to protect your resources and your peace of mind, regardless of what family members might expect or demand from you.